The most terrifying medieval tortures women endured, the truth they hid. Picture this. You stand in a town square at dawn. The stones beneath your feet are cold. Your hands are bound behind you. The rope cuts into your wrists. You can smell smoke. Wood smoke. Burning pitch. The crowd gathers around you like wolves circling wounded prey. A priest speaks Latin you cannot understand. His voice echoes off stone walls. You try to speak, to defend yourself, but the iron mask they locked around your face makes speech impossible. The metal bit presses down on your tongue. Every attempt to talk drives it deeper into your mouth. Blood pools beneath it. You did nothing wrong. You spoke when you should have been silent. You laughed when you should have been somber. You existed as a woman in a world that feared what it could not control. The crowd watches. Children point. Men nod in approval. Women turn their eyes away, knowing they could be next. This is not fiction. This is not an exaggeration. This happened for centuries in systems designed by law, blessed by church, and carried out by neighbors. History recorded the kings and the battles, but it buried the screams of women who were tortured simply for being inconvenient. Today, we unbury them. Medieval Europe was not a time of knights and romance. It was a world built on fear. The church held absolute authority over morality. The state held absolute power over bodies. And women held nothing at all. To be a woman in this era meant living under constant surveillance. Your words were watched. Your behavior was judged. Your silence was expected. Any deviation could mean accusation. Accusation meant trial. Trial meant torture. The legal systems of medieval Europe did not presume innocence. They presumed guilt. Torture was not punishment. It was an investigation. Pain was considered the only reliable path to truth. Women faced specific charges: witchcraft, adultery, heresy, scolding, gossip, disobedience. The crimes were vague enough that any woman could be accused, and once accused, survival was nearly impossible. Entire communities participated in these rituals. Neighbors testified. Priests blessed the instruments. Executioners carried out the sentence, and the law called it justice. This was not chaos. This was the order, and that makes it so much worse. The Scold's Bridle. The workshop is dark. An iron cage sits on the table. Inside it, a metal tongue shaped like a blade. The blacksmith hammers the final rivet into place. Outside, a woman waits in chains. Her crime? She argued with her husband in public. She spoke against a merchant who cheated her. She laughed too loudly in church. The exact offense changes depending on who tells the story, but the punishment stays the same. This device was used primarily in England and Scotland from the 16th to the 18th centuries. It targeted women accused of being scolds, women who spoke too much, women who complained, women who refused to be silent. The mechanics were simple and devastating. The iron framework locked around the head like a cage. The front piece covered the face. Inside, a flat iron bit extended into the mouth. Sometimes it was smooth. Often it was spiked. It pressed down on the tongue with the weight of the metal frame. When she tried to speak, the bit cut deeper. When she tried to swallow, the spikes pierced soft tissue. Some versions included a chain attached to the front. The woman would be paraded through town, like an animal. The crowd would jeer. Children would throw stones. The message was clear. This is what happens when women forget their place. The psychological damage was the point. The pain was secondary. This device did not punish speech. It humiliated the speaker. It transformed a human being into a spectacle. It taught other women to witness and fear. Entire communities gathered for these displays. Magistrates ordered them. Churches approved them, and the law called it correction. The Ducking Stool. The river runs cold in November. The wooden platform extends over the water like a gallows. The chair at the end is empty. Not for long. She is brought forward by two men. Her hands are tied. Her dress is soaked already from the rain. She shivers before the water even touches her. The ducking stool was used across England and colonial America from medieval times through the 18th century. It was reserved almost exclusively for women. The accused included scolds, witches, prostitutes, and women who sold bad bread or watered-down ale. The mechanics relied on water and humiliation. The woman was strapped into a wooden chair. The chair was attached to a long wooden beam. The beam acted as a lever. When the operator pushed down on one end, the woman on the other end was plunged into the river or pond. The first plunge was brief, just long enough to shock. She emerges gasping. The crowd jeers. The operator waits. Then he pushes the lever again. This time she stays under longer. Her lungs burn. Her vision blurs. She cannot tell which way is up. If she survives, she is guilty. If she drowned, she was innocent. The logic was medieval and absolute. God would protect the innocent. Therefore, survival proved guilt. Some women were ducked once. Others were ducked repeatedly until they confessed. Confession under torture was considered valid testimony. The cold water stopped their hearts. The panic destroyed their minds. But the law recorded only their words. This was not punishment. This was a theater. Public humiliation designed to remind every woman watching what happened when you stepped outside the boundaries men had drawn. Burning at the stake. The pyre is built in the center of the square. Bundles of wood stacked higher than a man's head. Straw packed between the logs. Pitch poured over everything to make it burn hotter and faster. She stands in the center, bound to a wooden post. Her feet rest on kindling. The crowd surrounds the pyre in concentric circles. Thousands of faces, all watching, all silent now. Burning at the stake was used across Europe from the medieval period through the 17th century. The victims were accused witches, heretics, and women convicted of murdering their husbands. The practice was sanctioned by both church and state. It was considered a cleansing fire, a purification. The mechanics were designed for maximum suffering and visibility. The woman was tied to a post in the center of the pyre. Sometimes her feet touched the ground. Sometimes she stood on a platform. The executioner lit the fire at multiple points. If she was fortunate, the smoke suffocated her before the flames reached her body. If she was not, she would be burned alive. The heat began at her feet. Her skin blistered. Her muscles contracted. She tried to scream, but smoke filled her lungs. The pain was absolute. The crowd watched without intervention. This was considered God's judgment made visible. Some executions used green wood that burned slowly. The torture lasted longer. Some used dry wood and pitch that burned fast. The mercy was relative. Either way, she burned. The psychological purpose extended beyond the individual. These executions were public events. They lasted hours. They drew crowds from surrounding villages. They were scheduled on market days when a maximum number of people could witness. The message was not subtle. This is what happens to women who practice heresy. This is what happens to women who defy their husbands. This is what happens when you are accused and the community decides you are guilty. Between the 15th and 18th centuries, an estimated 40,000 to 60,000 people were executed for witchcraft in Europe. Between 75 and 85% were women. The breast ripper. The chamber is underground. No windows. The only light comes from torches mounted on stone walls. The air smells of blood and burned flesh. In the center of the room sits an iron chair. Beside it, a table. On the table, an instrument that looks like a hand with claws. This device was used primarily in Germany and Austria during the late medieval period and the Renaissance. It targeted women accused of adultery, heresy, self-induced abortion, or any sexual crime deemed unnatural by the church. The breast ripper was made of iron. 4 claws extended from a central handle. The claws were shaped like talons, sharpened, sometimes heated in fire until they glowed red, sometimes used cold. The woman was stripped and restrained. The device was applied to the breast. The claws were positioned and then pulled. Hard. The iron tore through the skin, through fat, through muscle. Some versions were designed to remove the breast entirely. Others simply mutilated. The pain was unimaginable. Shock set in quickly. Infection followed days later. Many women died from blood loss or sepsis. Those who survived carried scars that marked them permanently. This was not about justice. This was about marking. The breast represented femininity, motherhood, sexuality. It was to destroy the woman's identity as a woman. It sent a message to her, to other women, to the community. Your body is not yours. It belongs to the church, to the state, to the men who judge you. The Spanish donkey. The device stands in the center of the torture chamber. It looks deceptively simple. A wooden beam shaped like an inverted V. The top edge is sharpened to a blade. It sits on 4 legs like a sawhorse. But this is no carpenter's tool. The Spanish donkey was used in medieval Europe, particularly during the Inquisition. It was applied to both men and women, but women accused of sexual crimes or heresy faced it with additional cruelty. The victim was stripped. She was lifted and placed on top of the beam. The sharpened edge pressed directly between her legs. Her full body weight rested on that single point. Then weights were added. Iron blocks attached to her ankles. The added weight drove her body down onto the blade. The pressure increased. The pain became unbearable. Hours passed. The wooden edge cut through the skin, through muscle, through bone. Some victims passed out. Some begged for death. None were granted mercy until the Inquisitor decided the session was over. The Spanish donkey did not kill quickly. It was destroyed slowly. It left survivors unable to walk, unable to bear children, unable to ever forget what had been done to them. This was psychological warfare. The device sat in the torture chamber where other prisoners could see it. The threat of it extracted confessions before it was even used. Fear became its own torture. The Pear of Anguish. It sits in the torturer's hand, a metal device shaped like a pear. Smooth, polished, beautiful in a horrible way. But when the screw at the top is turned, the pear opens. Petals of iron spreading outward, lined with spikes. The Pear of Anguish was used across Europe from medieval times through the Renaissance. Different versions existed for different orifices: oral, vaginal, rectal. The application depended on the crime. For women accused of adultery or sexual transgression, the vaginal version was used. For women accused of blasphemy, the oral version. The symbolism was deliberate. The punishment matched the perceived sin. The device was inserted while closed. Then the screw was turned slowly. The metal petals expanded inside the body. The spikes punctured internal tissue. The pain was interior, hidden, but absolute. The expansion continued until the torturer decided to stop. Sometimes the device was opened just enough to cause pain. Sometimes it was opened until it caused permanent internal damage. Sometimes it was opened until something inside tore beyond repair. Women who survived could not speak of what had been done to them. The shame was too great. The trauma was too deep. They carried the damage inside them, hidden, festering, destroying them slowly over years. This device represented the ultimate violation. It invaded the most intimate parts of the body. It transformed sexuality into a site of torture. It told women that even their interior selves belonged to the authorities who judged them. The heretic's fork. 2 forks. For prongs. One points up beneath the chin. One points down against the sternum. A leather strap connects them around the neck. The metal is cold, unforgiving. The heretic's fork was used during the Inquisition across Catholic Europe. It was applied to accuse heretics, including women who spoke against church doctrine or who were suspected of Protestant sympathies. The device forced the head into a permanent upward position. The victim could not lower her chin without the top prongs piercing the soft tissue beneath her jaw. She could not raise her head without the bottom prongs digging into her chest. Sleep became impossible. Speaking became dangerous. Swallowing became painful. The prongs were often engraved with the Latin word aburo. I recant. The message was clear. Confess. Recant. Abandon your beliefs. Or wear this until infection sets in. Until exhaustion breaks you. Until you say whatever they want you to say. This device did not kill. It broke wills. It turned human beings into instruments of their own torture. Every swallow drove the prongs deeper. Every breath was calculated. Every moment was conscious suffering. The psychological destruction was total. The body became a prison. The self became the torturer, and the church called it a correction. These devices were not isolated incidents of cruelty. They were not the work of individual sadists. They were systematic. They were legal. They were blessed by religious authority and carried out by respectable men in positions of power. The Scold's bridle, the ducking stool, the breast ripper, the Spanish donkey, the Pear of Anguish, the fire, the water, the iron, the blade. Each one served the same purpose. Control. These instruments did not punish crimes. They punished existence. They punished women for speaking, for refusing, for being accused, for being feared. The law provided cover. The church provided justification. The community provided the audience. And together, they created a system where women lived in constant terror of being next. This was not medieval barbarism. This was medieval order. The torture was the point. The pain was the message. And the silence that followed was the goal. Understanding this system means understanding how power works, how it justifies itself, how it recruits ordinary people to commit extraordinary cruelty, how it makes the unthinkable seem necessary. What these tortures reveal is not just historical cruelty. They reveal something fundamental about how societies engineer obedience. Power does not maintain itself through force alone. It maintains itself through fear, through spectacle, through rituals that teach entire populations what happens when boundaries are crossed. Every woman who watched a burning at the stake learned to be silent. Every man who watched a ducking learned that women's suffering was entertainment. Every child who saw the Scold's bridle learned that certain people's voices mattered less than others. This is how oppression becomes culture. It is taught, is normalized, is passed down through generations until it feels like natural law. The torture devices were tools, but the real weapon was the system that produced them. A system that convinced good people that cruelty was justice, that made neighbors testify against neighbors, that turned priests into endorsers of agony. We want to believe that we would have been different, that we would have stood up, that we would have refused to participate. But the evidence suggests otherwise. These systems functioned because most people went along, because obedience was easier than resistance, because the punishment for dissent was on display in the town square. Generational trauma lives in bodies, in collective memory, in the silences that families carry without knowing why. The women who survived these tortures carried the weight forever, but so did their daughters and their granddaughters. Fear becomes inheritance. What this teaches us is that cruelty is not an aberration. It is a choice that societies make. And once that choice is made, once the mechanisms are in place, once the justifications are established, the system runs itself. The medieval world is gone, but the impulse remains. The desire to control bodies, to silence dissent, to punish deviation, to use pain as policy. We see it in different forms now, different tools, different justifications, but the core mechanism is the same. Identify a target, dehumanize them, make their suffering visible, call it necessary, call it justice. These women had names. They had families. They had thoughts and dreams and fears. They were not witches. They were not heretics. They were human beings who were tortured because the system needed someone to torture. History wants us to believe this was ignorance, superstition, medieval thinking. But it was not ignorance. It was power. It was deliberate. It was designed to work exactly as it did. So we remember them now, not to dwell in darkness, not to glorify suffering, but to understand what human beings are capable of when they give themselves permission to believe that cruelty is righteous. We ask ourselves hard questions. What systems exist today that we participate in without questioning? What suffering do we witness and call necessary? What voices do we silence because hearing them would be inconvenient? The iron has cooled. The fires have gone out. The rivers no longer carry the weight of drowning women. But the capacity for this kind of systematic cruelty has not disappeared. It has only changed shape. These stories are not comfortable. They're not supposed to be. They are supposed to haunt us, to make us think, to make us question what we accept as normal. Because the moment we stop questioning is the moment we become part of the crowd watching the fire burn. If you believe these forgotten voices deserve to be remembered, subscribe to Humans History. Your support helps these lost stories rise from the shadows. Tell me in the comments which dark chapter you want me to uncover next.